Okay, oh well, kia ora koutou. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou, kua huitahi nei I tēnei ata. Thanks everybody for joining this morning. So the topic of, actually I should introduce myself. He uri ahau no Ngāti Maniapoto, ko Ngāti Pare te Kawa te hapu. Kei ōtaki ahau e noho ana, kei raro I te korowai aroha o Ngāti Pare, no reira nei ahau e mihi ana kia koutou. Okay, so yeah, I think that means that we're recording. Okay, so this discussion today is just looking at bilingualism and what that means for bicultural New Zealand Aotearoa. And so this beautiful picture of Hori, who lives out here in Otaki, we can see that in this picture, you know, that was taken all around Aotearoa. They've done a big, massive trip over to New Zealand, and so what we can see is that tangata whenua are paying a decent physical and financial price to making sure that Aotearoa is actively recognised as a bicultural country. So if we think about where we are now this week, so this week marks Te Pitihana Reo Māori, the 50th anniversary of Te Pitihana, the Māori language petition. And what we saw was a massive turnout at Parliament on Wednesday to support what we recognise as a really massive milestone. And all of these young people who are now our old people, who are now our kaumātua, we can see the massive contributions that they've made to ensuring that our language has survived and is in the position that we're in at the moment, at a great cost to themselves. Yeah, so I just want to mihi to all of those people who have ensured that we've been enabled to actually have what we have at the moment. So if we think about what was going on in 2006, even looking at some of the attitudes towards Te Reo Māori in 2006, which isn't, you know, that long ago, we saw that in the attitudes, the Te Puni Kōkiri attitude survey, so 15% of Pākehā view Te Reo Māori as a high priority for themselves, and 35% indicated that they would really like to be involved in things to do with Māori culture. And so what we see at the moment is quite a massive shift in the opposite direction. So we've had a lot more uptake about who is engaging in Reo Māori spaces. So you know, these are just some people that are really awesome. So we have, you know, Anadu Rob, unfortunately, kua haere atu ia ki ona tūpuna I tēnei tau, no reira nei ahau mihi ana ki aia, o tira kia koutou I tēnei o ngā I o ngā pikitia. So we've had a lot of Pākehā supporters of Te Reo Māori prior to the point where we have it at its current kind of attractiveness, of how attractive it is to people now. So, and a lot of these people on the screen, you know, they also sort of, it wasn't a neutral space to be going into Te Reo Māori spaces when they chose to be going into those spaces. So yeah, ine o ngā tangata, you know, it was perhaps, there was a lot at risk for these individuals. So we also see tauiwi solidarity, so a lot of tangata tauiwi coming into Māori language spaces as well, as recognition for the fact that you know, they want to have a relationship with tangata whenua as te iwi taketake, so as Indigenous peoples of this country. This is Ngāko, our beautiful Ngāko, one of our previous graduates, as well as ine tangata, so some whānau who have migrated to Aotearoa who have decided to take on Te Reo Māori. So there are a lot of motivations for biculturalism by those who choose to invest in this space. So some of my previous research has looked at motivations of Pākehā who have chose to learn Te Reo Māori, and one of the things that is interesting is this idea of social identity theory. So part of the rationale behind some Pākehā who have chosen to engage in Te Reo Māori in the past has partly been in response to kind of moving away from some of those more racist views about Te Reo Māori. So on the one hand, if we think about social identity as sort of positioning oneself in a way that is more favourable in their own perceptions of what a good New Zealander might look like, or what a person from Aotearoa looks like, who is perhaps behaving in a way that is more aligned to being a good citizen. And what we found was that a lot of individuals found other like-minded people to support their Reo Māori journey. So in this particular study, Pākehā talked about the fact that Māori culture acted for them as a symbol of national identity. So rather than seeing it as something that was specific to Māori, they viewed this as being kind of something more a part of what it meant to be a member of Aotearoa. So this is just a couple of quotes here. So because I'm New Zealand Pākehā, you go, look, I'm a New Zealander. I don't identify with English culture. I don't identify with German culture. I'm still a New Zealand Pākehā, and if these are the official languages of New Zealand, I should probably know them. Okay, so there were some pretty pragmatic decisions that were going on there, but they clearly link to this idea of a national identity. So what we've seen recently is kind of a larger influx of non-Māori who are learning Te Reo, and this is creating some new challenges, I suppose, in this space. And so what Professor Alison Jones, she's done a lot of research in education and the positionality of Pākehā in education spaces, and trying to encourage Pākehā to be not at the centre of the discussion. So some of her research, earlier research, 2001, she's had a lot of whakaaro about these things. So in this article here, for E Tangata, so she encourages Pākehā to come into this Reo Māori space, really thinking about positionality and what it means to be a Pākehā in this space of reclamation. So what we know for tangata whenua is that, learning Te Reo Māori is very personal. Anybody that's seen Kia ora, good evening. The other night, we saw Mike in a really vulnerable position, and that's what a lot of our tangata whenua are doing when they are firstly engaging in their ancestral language. And so we've got people who are engaging in Te Reo Māori from a number of various identity positions and for a number of different reasons. And so if we have Māori who have come into this space trying to think about what it means to reclaim their language, what it means to be thinking about all of the reasons why they are in perhaps an institution or a formal learning environment, learning their own ancestral language, and some of the colonial violence that created those conditions. That's a very different experience than some of those other reasons for learning Te Reo that we've just seen. So this is one of the quotes from another study, Manua Uki Te Reo Māori. So this is a report that's available on the Mātāwai website. So yeah, just so this person who has a pseudonym here. So there was a political kind of, it became about thinking about politics of being Māori and stuff. And I know that Pākehā colleagues tries really hard to do that well, being a Pākehā speaker of Te Reo, and she tries really hard to put other Pākehā in place when they become kind of, I'm going to answer all their questions. Or, so she's talking about, in this particular quote, she's talking about, the fact that they haven't lost their language. It's a luxury to pick up a language. And also the fact that there are resourcing implications. So one of the recent studies showed that it costs $180,000 for one couple to take a year off studying, take a year off work to study Te Reo Māori in a full immersion environment. So there are definite costs to actually being able to engage in these spaces. And we know that, this can be a massive barrier. So what we've seen recently is an encouragement by a lot of Māori people to really encourage Pākehā people who are coming into these Māori language spaces to act with kindness, act with humility, so as Mihi Ngā Rangi Forbes talks about here, if you are Pākehā and learning Te Reo, please be gentle with Māori who haven't had the same opportunity to learn their language. So, there are a number of different dynamics going on here. So, while we're all supportive of biculturalism and bilingualism, we understand that, perhaps some of those costs, or perhaps unpacking some of those language trauma, have been a reason why some of our own people haven't actually had an opportunity to gain their heritage language. So there's a lot going on in our society at the moment. So again, this is from that Manawa study that I was saying that we've got on the Te Mata Wai website. So I asked our participants, so this was a national study, and I asked some of our participants, how they felt about being in classes with Pākehā, and if they could impart some words of encouragement to Pākehā who were engaging in these Reo Māori spaces, what kind of advice would they ask for? And everybody, kind of hands down, most people said this idea of manaakitanga. So, mai rā no, ko te manaakitanga, te taihunga tino tikanga kua tino, whakau. So, so thinking about manaakitanga as a central way of engaging, acknowledging positionality, acknowledging the history, acknowledging the privilege of even being able to learn Te Reo Māori. Those were all things that came through. Also thinking about, so they raised other ideas around how often Pākehā were comfortable asking questions, so centering themselves in Reo Māori discussions. Those were things that Māori who are learners of Te Reo Māori asked Pākehā to kind of be conscious of. So, this particular study was done quite a few years ago now, so it was about 8 years ago. What we see is that Te Reo Māori does provide Pākehā with tools of engagement and ways of thinking about this. But one of the interesting things that has happened more recently is the shift in the numbers of Pākehā in some of our classes. So, in 101, for instance, we had 58% of that class were Pākehā compared with 42% who are Māori. So even just those numbers, the sheer, sort of security in numbers, and that sort of changes the dynamic from even just 5 years ago, really, when we were, when there were, it was more of a sort of an equal balance of who was learning Te Reo, particularly in a tertiary space. So all of this also relates back to mainstream views, okay? And so what we've seen is the role of the media. The media have played a considerable role in the dehumanisation of our population, which contributed to the stuff's apology to tangata whenua. So the labelling of Māori in these shows, the racial profiling, this all contributes to a negative perception of who Māori are. So on the one hand, we also see that Māori are the #1 racial group who are victimised in New Zealand. 93% of participants in a 2019 study, national study with Cheryl Smith and colleagues, showed that 93% of Māori participants experience racism on a daily basis. So how does te reo impact on racism? So what we see is, it's a national symbol of identity. It's something that it can help people engage with Māori, but really does it get to the crux of the issue, which is racism? So, some of the responses here, so I ignore them. By nature, I'm not a particularly confrontational person, but this is kind of, being able to ignore racist comments. That's kind of a position of privilege as well. So what we've seen more recently is kind of a call, I suppose, to Pākehā to respond to racism that is directed toward Māori. And, this participant here talks about the fact that racists tend to respect the opinions of white people more. And at the very least, I'll be a white person who understands te reo Māori and can phrase people who I interact with in ways that might get listened to. Yeah, so I mean, this is a really important point, but also being careful not to speak on behalf of Māori, so knowing those differences. So this is, we're very close to them, sorry. So just another, what it looks like to be a ally in 2022 and beyond. So I really highly recommend people watching Oliver Sutherland's documentary, When Nobody Was Looking. This is a beautiful example of what we might hope to aspire to. So just a reminder that language revitalisation is political. So, and this is just a comment from Te Atako, who in response to the Lord album last year, so she said that the work that we do to support te reo is inextricably linked. Oh, look, you've seen the quote, you can read it yourselves. And this is my book that's out next week. So there are some bits and pieces that might be relevant there. Okay, so I'll stop there. So I've just got one question. Yeah, kia ora koutou, thanks for tuning in. So how do you feel about Pākehā learning te reo on free courses provided by Māori such as Te Wānanga? I had been accepted onto a course, but I am hesitant as I have heard views that Pākehā should step back from these courses as they are intended for Māori to learn them easier. It really depends on the long-term nature of your investment. So if you're just wanting to learn te reo for a few pronunciation tips, or you don't really have a long-term goal in actually gaining fluency to a communicative level, then some of the free courses and online courses are really good as an option, just responding to that particular question. Yeah, so but yeah, the whole resourcing thing, that's an issue at the moment, because we have the same kind of relatively same amount of teachers and et cetera, but we've had an increased number of interests. So we're just trying to manage those competing challenges. But also, I think, yeah, if you have the means to enroll in, say, like a paid course, then that's also an option that would be positive. So Annette, has asked what needs to happen to support Māori who have no contact with whānau, loss of trust in education. Lots of things need to happen. Yeah, so that's part of the whole challenge, is that a lot of people are coming into Reo Māori spaces to reconnect with who they are, and through the process of gaining confidence in Te Reo Māori, that often leads to them feeling a little bit more confident to, you know, make those other claims. Also in those Reo Māori contexts, they create social relationships who can act to support those aspirations. So it's kind of about the healing nation. Sorry, the healing notion of yeah, that point. Sorry, Lucas, kia ora. What's the role of Pākehā learning Te Reo Māori in decolonisation and the decolonisation of Tangata whenua? Yeah, so kia ora, Lucas. I think positionality is very important, and also learning about the history of Aotearoa is very important, and also learning about racism and how it functions in our society. So I think the challenge that we have is that we have a lot of really well-intended people, so well-meaning Pākehā, who are trying to come up with solutions for what they might do to be better treaty partners. And so what has been pushed forward as an answer to that is Te Reo Māori. So that's become, you know, that's become kind of a solution to being bicultural. But what we know is that in our Reo Māori classes, we don't address issues of systemic racism. We don't address colonial violence. So all of those learnings are incidental learnings, but they really need to be understood in order for those things of manaakitanga to actually yeah, be actualized in a meaningful way. So lots of things that Pākehā can do to support learning of Te Reo Māori. The other thing is that you know, they Pākehā can be helpful in the sharing of resources and study tips, and you know, there's other good things that can come from collaborative relationships. It's just around, yeah, making sure that that tangata whenua are at the centre of those discussions, and that the learning experiences of tangata whenua are the central focus kind of in some of those learning contexts. So I don't know if that sort of answers your question, but hopefully it's, yeah, kia ora. Rihari, kia ora, ngā mihi ki a koe. Ka pai, ka hono mai, ka pai, so rihari. That is another interesting point. So awesome that you have yeah, so particularly so for parents who have children with whakapapa Māori, it's really important that, you know, you do get involved, and also as a papa, you know, you are demonstrating to your kids the value of Te Reo Māori. So so Pākehā who have Māori children, I think, you know, if we're thinking about the priority of who needs to go to these things, you're the people that need to be in Reo Māori classes. You're the people that that are really actually, there's an urgency about Te Reo Māori. It's not just a nice to have, it's kind of, there's a functional outcome for what you're doing. Yeah, so yeah, okay. And yeah, kia ora Janet. Oh, you'll see your book on my bookshelf. Yeah, it's awesome to yeah, it's really important that we acknowledge also where racism is coming from. So these are deep-seated issues, and they yeah, they require a lot of systemic thinking, a lot of breaking down for who sorry, I'm just reading the next one. Oh, kia ora, kia ora. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, so okay, this is just about the support for the immersion programs. I think, you know, Māori immersion education is pretty, it's a big issue for us in terms of teacher shortage, resources, and, you know, in the COVID times, it's just become even more, you know, we've become more aware of what those issues might be. So yeah, resourcing. I think the thing, that's another way that Pākehā can support learning te reo is actually arguing on our behalf for the correct allocation of resources to be supported, to support our people in these spaces. So yeah, if we had equitable funding to actually deal with the issues that we're dealing with in our Māori medium education, that is a great use of your decolonising efforts if you are a non-Māori in this space. Yeah, so kia ora koutou, ngā mihi, ngā mihi nui. Thanks for listening to me stumbling through this presentation. And I wonder if we can put up some of the links to, so those, if you want to just check out my bio, the Pākehā papers are all on there. I think the Manawa'u paper is on there, and then yeah, the book is on the THW VUP. Okay, kia ora pola, ngā mihi. Okay.